Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, everyone, and welcome to one of our trust building events this evening. Before we start, I'm sure you've all had some food, but you're more than welcome to go back and help yourself to more during the lecture. So I'm just going to start with a bit about trust building. So the Trust Building Forum was launched in 2016, and it's all about promoting mutual trust in communities to the wider community, between Muslims and the wider community. So the objective is to promote trust amongst communities, your neighbours, and we do this in many different ways, and it's all about myth busting. So all the negative narratives about Muslims, we try and dispel those by going into organisations, different community groups, and working with different organisations as well. So the objective, as I said, is to build trust, to raise awareness, myth busting on Islam, creating opportunities for interaction and dialogue. We train a network of ambassadors of all faith or no faith. So I have a team of 20 ambassadors who are trained and ready to go out into the community and deliver some of the workshops and some of the events that we do. But I need more ambassadors. So I really need more people to come together and be a part of the Trust Building Forum. And what you'll get as a benefit is training, being part of a diverse team, building relationships with organisations, developing communication and presentation skills, and being part of a social impact project as well, which is really important. We always partner up with different organisations. Tonight's food was hosted by Nottingham City Homes, the Equality Diversity Forum, so thank you to them. But we always partner up with the police, with the City Council, with Nottingham City Homes, with the universities. So if you are interested in becoming an ambassador after tonight's lecture, then please see Dr. Asim, who is one of my ambassadors as well, and sign up to become an ambassador to make that difference. But tonight we're here with Howard Grace. And I'll let Howard Grace introduce our special guest. But Howard Grace is the Executive Director of a documentary called Beyond Forgiving. So Howard, I'll pass it over to you.
It's lovely to be here. We feel so welcome, and it's a real privilege to be with you here this evening. We're going to hear from Letlapa, my South African friend, shortly. Apparently the structure of the evening is that at 8 o'clock we'll break for prayers and then come back together again. So at the beginning, just to introduce myself, my name's Howard Grace and I come from Newbury in Berkshire, which is south of London and south of Oxford and west of London. I went to school there. I was born and brought up there. And then I went to university in London to study physics. And when I graduated, I had a complete change in direction in life, and I haven't thought about physics since. I spent the next 14 years working with a voluntary organisation, Initiatives of Change, mostly overseas. During that time, I met my to-be wife, who is Dutch. And when we got married, we wondered, what are we going to do together in our lives? And at that time, we met a number of people of all races from South Africa. And this was the 1970s, right in the middle of apartheid times, which I'm sure most of you have heard about. So my wife and I accepted an invitation to join them in an attempt to bring change in their society. We had a wonderful but challenging 4 years there. And in 1979, I fell foul of the security police, and suddenly we found ourselves back here. So I had my wife and I had 2 daughters under the age of 2, and I was really churned up inside of what we'd experienced. So at the age of 40, I decided to train to be a teacher of mathematics. It wasn't out of any sense of calling to be a teacher, it was out of a sense of survival. I got to do something to survive. I spent the next 14 years doing that, and then I had another transformation. I stopped formal teaching to launch a programme going into sixth forms all around Britain to stimulate thought on purpose in life and motivation. And with teams of young people, mostly from other countries, I facilitated about 800 sessions in sixth forms all around the country. But a few smaller, younger children, including being invited by Dr. Musharraf here, and we've been several times in your school. About 15 years ago, my wife and I went to a conference in Switzerland on reconciliation and trust building. And two of the people speaking at that conference together was my friend Letlapa and a lady, a South African lady, whose daughter had been killed in a massacre which Letlapa had ordered. And to see those two speaking together really made a deep impact on the audience, including me. So I got to know Letlapa and Jin, the woman, the mother whose daughter was killed. And I invited Letlapa to come to Britain, this was 15 years ago, as part of that programme in sixth forms. And we went to 36 sixth forms in 6 weeks and had a wonderful time. But I also showed a DVD that I'd made of Jin, the woman, speaking about her side of the story. So the students got a balanced picture of Letlapa's side and this woman's side, which was very helpful. But seeing the impact that that made on the students made me decide that I would like to make a film to get that message out there much more widely, and that is the film Beyond Forgiving. And the director, I'm the executive producer of the film, but the director is a Palestinian Muslim from Gaza. So we went together to South Africa to meet with Jin and Letlapa to make this film. Why were we, my wife and myself, ejected from South Africa? In 1976, some of you may know, there was a schools boycott. That was because the South African government, which was dominated by white people, of course, but particularly Afrikaners, these are people of Dutch descent, and they had their own language, Afrikaans, which comes out of Dutch. But they stipulated that in future, all education for black school children would be in Afrikaans. And the school children weren't very good at that language anyway, but it was the language of oppression. So what did the students do? They boycotted schools, particularly in Soweto, the big black township outside Johannesburg. So what was the response of the authorities, the government? They sent in the military, and hundreds of school children were shot dead. I knew some of those children. I knew the chair. He was 16 years old, the chair of the Student Representative Council in Soweto. And I visited him in prison. He told me how he was being tortured and all sorts of things. And the police sitting there obviously weren't happy with a foreigner hearing all this. So that led to us having to leave South Africa. At that time, Letlapa was aged 15. He wasn't in Soweto, he was in an African village school, and he had his own feelings and experiences of discrimination. But hearing the story of how these school children were being shot dead, what would he do? when he was 17, he decided that one day when leaving for school, instead of going to school, he would skip over the border to Botswana and join the liberation struggle. What happened after that? Letlapa, would you tell us what happened after that?
I greet you all. My name is Letlapa Mphahlele, a South African. Indeed, on the morning of August 15th, 1978, I left my home, my parents, my siblings, my neighbors, under the pretext of going to school. But I had made up my mind that I was not going to school, but I was going to a different country, which means I was going into exile. I went into exile in the neighboring country of Botswana. I'm not trying to incite you, my friend, to cross the Irish borders and go to the Republic of Ireland. I went there to join the liberation movement. I joined the Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC. Within the PAC, I joined its military wing, the Azanian People's Liberation Army. Then I went to East Africa, Tanzania in particular, where I did my basic military training. From there, I went to West Africa, Guinea. There were 2 Guineas, but Guinea-Conakry. Then I did some advanced military training there. I rose through the ranks of the guerrilla army until I became its director of operations. The war was meant to go soldier to soldier, army to army, but the reality of the war was different because civilians were killed by the regime, but not as civilians, but as agitators, as terrorists, whatever name they could coin it. Some were killed in detention like Steve Biko. And during the war, 5 school children were killed. The youngest was 12 years, the oldest was 17 years, and they were killed because the South African authorities said they were members of the Azanian People's Liberation Army, and it wasn't true. Out of anger, I ordered retaliatory attacks on the white civilians. And as the war was raging, I had a premonition that I was going to be killed. So I started writing a book, Child of This Soil, My Life as a Freedom Fighter. Fast track that, then the country went to elections, but still I had charges laid against me. I was put into prison, and later charges were withdrawn. I had the opportunity to publish the book. It was at the book launch where journalists came in large numbers, and even book lovers who wanted, who were invited by Cape Town Press Club, which was the organizer of the book launch. The journalists typically ask questions: are you a terrorist, etc. But in the audience, a woman stood up, identified herself as Jean Fourie, mother of Lindy, a victim of one of my attacks. And she had very tough questions that she asked me. But at this juncture, I would like to pause so that we can have a 2-minute trailer of the film Beyond Forgiving. was fighting in South Africa. Wars after wars after wars of resistance.
I was now coming face to face with the person who was responsible for Lindy's death.
For a long time, I had demonized the people I was fighting against.
I had this perception of an evil person.
For the first time, I met someone whose daughter died as a result of my command.
How does one move from victimhood to survivor and then to wounded healer? I can only speak from my own experience. That experience of forgiveness sparks me to share the story, and I think Letlapa as well.
Storytelling is part of a healing process. It's a catharsis.
If there was more sharing and understanding of the deep needs of people who've been marginalized, the world could be a different place.
Well, this is just a trailer. There's a longer version of the film. I have moved on since the happenings, mutual killings. I have found that the path of hate or hatred takes us nowhere as human race, and I am exploring the path of shared humanity. I'm not an expert. I'm not here to moralize on it. I'm not here to sermonize on it, but I'm here to seek fellow explorer on this path of shared humanity. And could you, Howard, share with friends here what Imad Karam, a Palestinian, said, which is very, very profound, about trying to find one another towards shared humanity.
Yes, as I said earlier, Imad Karam is the director of Beyond Forgiving. And a couple of years ago, when Palestine was being bombed by Israeli forces, he said an interesting thing. He said, "We Palestinians and the Israelis are both trapped in our own narratives." And I thought how true that is for so many situations in the world. International conflicts, national issues, people get trapped in their own side. But it's not only there, is it? Husbands and wives who may be the same nationality, the same race, the same religion, the same language, sometimes fight like cat and dog, trapped in our own narratives. So Imad said what's important is that we live into each other's narratives, not be just trapped in our own. And that is what Letlapa and Jin did. They lived into each other's narratives. Letlapa has lived into what it must be like for Jin to lose her daughter like that. She has lived into what it must have been like to live as a black South African under that apartheid regime. But then Imad said something else very interesting. He said, what we actually need is an inclusive narrative which we can all buy into. That doesn't mean to say we give up our identities at the moment. We can keep our identities, but really live into a bigger thing. We're all human beings. When we hear that story, we can understand as human beings what it's like to lose your only daughter like that. You don't have to be particularly religious or non-religious or anything. So that's the sort of shared humanity that we're talking about, that we're trying to foster. As Letlapa said, neither of us are perfect by any means, but we're trying to move forward along that path because we think that it's a much better foundation to be able to address the differences we have rather than the them and us spirit, which often permeates society. So that's what we want to explore this evening.